What's up, guys? It's Dr. Tim Jackson with another episode of the Boss Body Podcast. Sleep. We all need more sleep or better quality sleep. So I brought in a sleep expert, Martha Lewis, who's a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner.
While I make every effort to broadcast correct information, I'm also still learning. I will double check all my facts, but realize that healthcare is a constantly changing science and art. One doctor or healthcare provider may have a different way of doing things from another. I welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. I take no money from supplement or device companies. By listening to this podcast or reading this blog, you agree not to use this podcast or blog as medical advice or to treat any medical condition in either yourself or others, including but not limited to patients that you are treating. Consult your healthcare provider for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast or the website. Under no circumstances shall any guests or contributors to the podcast or blog or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the Boss Body podcast be responsible for damages arising from use of the podcast or the blog. This blog or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing the standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or the blog.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Tim. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So sleep. Obviously, more people became aware of their health during the past 5 years, 6 years, but we're having a harder time sleeping than ever. Talk to us about some of the root causes as to why.
Yeah, I think what people don't realize, because, for anyone who can't sleep, if you Google it, it's going to give the same advice. Have a bedtime routine. Don't drink caffeine too late in the day. Don't watch screens, all of that. And I think what people really don't know is that there are imbalances in the body that affect sleep, like hormones, like gut health, like neurotransmitters. And so a lot of times blood work comes back normal, everything looks great, but there's still these kind of underlying health issues that have probably been there for a while, and then eventually they manifest in symptoms like sleep issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the most common cause I see, it's not high cortisol, and that may go along with it, but it's really inflammation from mycotoxins. Mycotoxins cross the blood-brain barrier, they activate the microglial cells. And so if I have someone who's not responding to sleep supplements or meds, that's usually the common cause that I see.
Yeah. I love it that you talk about that because that's something that I screen for as well. And, mycotoxins are, and other pathogens too, like parasites can be common,
Yep.
bacterial overgrowth, things like that in the gut. Yeah. And
Yep.
they can cause high cortisol at night. And so then that's why, we aren't able to sleep. And that's what it was for me. I had a parasite.
Okay. So talk to us about that. And did it finally show up on testing?
It did actually. It showed up on the first stool test I ever did. But, I struggled for a couple years trying to do all the right things. I was even a pediatric sleep consultant, and then I took an adult sleep certification class. And it's like the sleep hygiene, and I call it the sleep rules. Like they helped me for a little bit, but they weren't, it wasn't enough. My sleep was still
Right.
very up and down. And if I would go through a stressful time, it would just really deteriorate and I would be up in the night for a few hours every night. And so once I learned about functional lab testing and did this test and it showed a parasite right away and my cortisol was super high in the middle of the night as well. And so, yeah, those were just some of the reasons why I wasn't sleeping well.
And I'm curious to know what type of stool test was it that showed the parasite?
I did the GI map.
Okay, good. Yeah, I use that a lot. Use Gut Zoomer. Um,
Yep.
but a lot of times there's false negatives, right? For
Yep.
parasites. So what are some of the other, besides parasites, besides mycotoxins, what are some other common causes in today's modern society of why people aren't either getting enough sleep or enough deep sleep?
Right. Well, hormones definitely affect sleep. And so, of course, women my age in that perimenopausal stage, but even for men too. A lot of times I see like estrogen dominance where estrogen is higher than testosterone in men or progesterone in women, and that's affecting sleep, or if hormones are just depleted overall,
Yeah.
then we need estrogen and progesterone and testosterone for good sleep. And so, yeah, so a lot of times I see either depleted hormones or hormone imbalances that don't necessarily have to do with cortisol at night, but are still affecting sleep. So that's another big one.
Yeah, I see people all the time and they're taking, ashwagandha or Serophos. They're like, but I'm still not sleeping. I'm like, well, there's other causes besides high cortisol.
Yeah.
Um, Talk about the different stages of sleep, which ones are considered deep or delta wave sleep, and which ones are not deep sleep.
Yeah, so we have what are called sleep cycles throughout the night, where the first two stages are a lot lighter sleep. And so that's when if someone wakes you up, say right after you go to sleep, and they wake you up and you're like, but I wasn't even sleeping yet. So half the
Yeah,
time, it's pretty light, but according to brain waves on an EKG, like you are sleeping. And then we get into what's called deep sleep, and then REM sleep, which is that kind of more dream. We associate that with the more dreaming stage of sleep. And so we cycle through those all night long. And most people have about 5 to 6 of those cycles that are around 90 minutes. They're a little different for everyone. And what's interesting is that we tend to spend more time in deep sleep in the middle of or the beginning of the night, and more time in REM sleep toward the end of the night. So that's why a lot of times people think, oh, I sleep so much deeper the first part of the night. And that's because you are in that
yeah,
deeper part of sleep for longer. And then, waking up to dreams in the morning is normal because that's what ends the sleep cycle.
right.
So, yeah, hopefully that helps explain a little bit what's going on.
And do you talk to people about sleep apnea and sleep disordered breathing? This book, I send to almost, I had another one, gas. I send
Mm,
almost everyone. Well, I would say 90% of people for sleep studies.
yeah,
And the ENTs, pulmonologists, they almost always miss it because they only have the CPAP and the BiPAP to treat it. And so, they'll say, because you have to have 14 hypoxic events per hour to be considered positive for sleep apnea. But if you have 13, that's still significant. And
right.
so the airway centric dentists, in my experience, do a good job.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something that I kind of screen for and point people towards if necessary. I'm more helping with what's called insomnia, not necessarily medically diagnosed, but
Right.
I think people can have both or one or the other of
Mhm.
insomnia or apnea, and they can go hand in hand. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but I have noticed that even just lowering inflammation in the body and dealing with pathogens, like that really helps apnea, if
Yep.
it's more an inflammatory issue and
Yep.
less of a structural issue. So, yeah.
Yeah. That and, chewing hard things. I don't have it up here, but jaws
Mm,
to, our ancestors were chewing hard things all the time and, Gerber baby food. I mean, you look at kids chewing that. There's a lady, she's, I think, a bioanthropological researcher in Paris, and she has skulls from like 300 years ago up to present day. And she said, the maxilla of the upper jaw gets narrower and narrower every couple of years. But it's modifiable. I've seen people in their
hmm
mid 70s, late 70s, even early 80s expand. So I use the Jazzerciser, but I do myofunctional therapy too, because for many years I was going without chewing correctly.
mm,
But yeah, I think there's obviously central sleep apnea, which is more neurological, and then the structural. But I think the misconception is you have to be obese to have sleep apnea.
right.
But I would say most of my gym friends have sleep disordered breathing because, their muscularity. I have an oral appliance that brings my mandible down and forward. And so I don't have sleep apnea anymore. But those oxygen saturations that you see on the pulse oximeter, there can be a 5% difference between what's on the pulse oximeter and what's happening at the tissue level.
Yeah. Interesting.
And so let's talk about things like yeast, viruses. I did have someone, I think about 5 years ago, who we were going after his viral load to go because it was causing symptoms, but it ended up doubling his deep sleep. So talk to us about viruses, yeast, any sort of pathogen outside of parasites, because we covered that. But talk to us about those things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so many of those pathogens are nocturnal, and so it's the middle of the night that they're eating, excreting, releasing a lot of toxins, and those toxins lead to inflammation. And so then the body releases cortisol to deal with that, and so it can wake you up. And then it's also put an extra burden on the liver with all of those toxins. So that's another thing I see is most of my clients have liver detox issues. And even if, they'll always say, but I don't drink a lot of alcohol. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, there's more to it than alcohol. I mean, we're exposed to environmental toxins, even if we try and do our best to minimize them. And then if there are literally toxins being produced in your body, then that's putting this extra burden on your liver. And so I've just found that pretty much, I would say like 99% of my clients need liver support as well in different ways. It's kind of different for everyone.
Yeah. And if you have a gut issue, it's eventually going to manifest in the liver also because of
Mhm.
the connection with the portal vein.
Yes.
Um, do you have people test progesterone if they're females who are going through perimenopause or menopause? Obviously, it can be low way before that, but certainly during those times.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, I use the Dutch test for hormones, and it's not always as valuable about the actual level of the hormones, but it really shows how they're being broken down by the body or metabolized by the body. And then that looks at your cortisol pattern too. So that test gives a lot of other information. But yes,
Mhm.
hormones are definitely a piece of the puzzle for many people as well.
Yeah. And um, in terms of the biggest needle mover that you've seen over the years, what would you say has worked to move the needle the most for people?
Well, actually, a test I just started using a couple years ago is neurotransmitter testing.
Oh.
And so looking directly at things like serotonin and dopamine and GABA that all really, are important for sleep as well. And so many of my clients, those are just really depleted. And, it also explains mood issues and, lots of other, yeah, lots of other symptoms that people have. And so supporting neurotransmitters has really helped people improve very quickly while we're still addressing, okay, we still need to address the gut so that those neurotransmitters stay in balance. But yeah, it can be a really faster way to kind of speed up someone being able to sleep better while we address everything else.
And are you using an organic acids test for that, or do you use a direct neurotransmitter, urine neurotransmitter
Yeah, I'm
test?
using a direct one. It's through M2 Institute.
Okay.
It's called, yeah. So they have a neurofocus panel that specifically tests for those neurotransmitters.
Does it test for acetylcholine?
It doesn't test for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Saber Sciences, I haven't used them in a while, but they're out of California and they have one that tests for acetylcholine, and
Mm,
they have a compounding pharmacist on staff and they can make a topical cream that has, the precursors, to apply on the forehead or
amazing.
forearms. So yeah, I think it's still available. Have you tried the Somnium cream from Apothecary?
I haven't. What is in that?
So it's GABA bound to chondroitin sulfate. So it's able to cross the blood-brain barrier. It's Dr. Christine Schaffner's product. I use it pretty much every night and have for a couple of years. But I just apply it here. There's also, it's called Be Serene cream from the Healthy Gut Company,
Hmm.
Stephen Wright. Um, and I think, well, he might be an FDN, but I think he's Kalish trained, Kalish practitioner.
Okay.
But his product is really good with the GABA and L-theanine in it as well.
Yeah.
In terms of supplementation, so if someone's not sleeping, like maybe 1 or 2 hours per night, what are your go-to supplements to start with?
Well, I do like to use the testing first instead of necessarily guessing. But again, a lot of my clients are gonna be able to really use 5-HTP and the, GABA and things like that. Again, usually some sort of liver supplement, usually some sort of supplement to support the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And then, yeah, dealing with whatever pathogens are there. So it is definitely different for everyone. Sometimes, I'm screening in the beginning, like, okay, people might be having methylation issues. So maybe we'll get started with that while we're still waiting on all their test results to confirm that. Or someone's having issues with histamine. So we can start with, with something there to help.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I really like to use the testing because it is slightly different for everyone.
Yeah. And so you use the GI map, you use was the MT2 neurotransmitter panel,
Mhm.
and then the Dutch test. Any other testing?
And then the hair tissue mineral analysis or the HTMA. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And so, because I get people all the time sending me their HTMA and they're like, I don't have any heavy metals. I'm like, no, that's what you're excreting. So if you're not
Right.
excreting, I'm more concerned.
Yep.
Um, and so I think, they get it after that. But
Yep.
what are you working on now? Because you see clients one-on-one, but you also have a group program, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And what's the
Yeah.
group program? What does it cover?
So it's still analysis of the same test and they still get a customized protocol. It's just we meet as a group for questions come up, when they come up, we have weekly group coaching calls and then there's daily chat support too in the group if things come up there. So I just wanted to have, a lower cost way to still support people and because I really think that supporting them is is important. I think a lot of my clients have been to other practitioners and doctors and like they're told to do all these things and then there's no follow-up.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so helping people kind of troubleshoot and stay committed and all of that. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really important.
And what about the light environment, non-native EMFs, blue light,
Mhm.
all those things?
Yep, those are all definitely things that I'm, looking for and recommending. I mean, especially with mold, I'm sure, people can be a lot more sensitive to EMFs. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I talk a lot about the physiological imbalances that lead to sleep issues, but I also still do make sure that, we have good sleep habits, that diet is optimized, that blood sugar is staying steady. And I also really help with the mindset of not sleeping because a lot of my clients have been struggling for a long time. And, they're really anxious about sleep and they dread bedtime. And so we work on all of those things as well.
And so you have them wearing blue blockers.
Yep, ideally. Yeah.
Some are struggling to be compliant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
They would definitely struggle to. I don't have them up here, but I wear the safety blue. Oh, I have these for during the daytime. These are
Hmm.
blockbluelight.com. But the safety blue at night, I have colleagues who call me Mr. Ant-Man, um, because it look like a giant bug and they wrap around, but you don't get any light from
Oh,
above or below. Now they're
yeah.
so powerful, there's a big warning on the box that says, do not attempt to drive with these glasses. And the first time I wore them, I was running into stuff literally,
Oh,
because I
wow.
went from a pair. I won't name the brand on the air and throw them under the bus, but they were like these, but for nighttime. But you're getting light in
Mm,
here, here, here. And so when I went to those, it was like, whoa, different world. And it blocks blue and green light.
mm.
So it really was a game changer for me. And then do you have people either test their homes for Wi-Fi or unplug the Wi-Fi at night, or not test their homes for Wi-Fi, but test their homes for dirty electricity and then unplug the Wi-Fi?
Definitely, I recommend unplugging the Wi-Fi, having it on a timer. That's what I do. So you don't even have to think about it. And
Yeah,
yeah, and then getting things out of your bedroom, especially, yeah, especially the more sensitive clients and who are dealing with
yeah,
mold and things. Yeah, that can
yeah.
make a really big difference.
Yeah, it's surprising how many people fight me on that. And I'm like, okay, let's
Yeah,
say that I'm wrong. What have you lost? Nothing, right?
right.
But if I'm correct, then it could really mess you up. The non-native EMFs, because if you have heavy metals, you're turning your body into a giant antenna when you're exposed to the non-native EMFs, and it obviously floods the blood-brain barrier, peroxynitrite, all the inflammatory markers. Um, I have one of the Mercola tents that you sleep in.
Mm,
I used it once, admittedly. It's in a spare bedroom. It's just hard to sleep in what I call a tiger cage, you
mm.
know? It's just not really practical. But I do have underneath my mattress, it's called Magnetico. It's a 10 Gauss pad that mimics the Schumann resonance of the Earth. So I think that helps.
Mm.
Do you have any gadgets underneath your bed?
No, but probably should. I mean, I turn my Wi-Fi off every night, but I'm living right next to power lines. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's not ideal.
Yeah. And I just talked to someone the other day who's living like 5 minutes from a 5G tower,
Mm,
and they had someone come and test their home. And I think people, if they can't see it, it's just like with mold, even though it's there. If it's not Stachybotrys, black mold, they, think it's not harmful. But I'm like, that's what's going to take you out.
yeah,
Because car accidents, obviously those can be fatal, but usually people rally around to help you. But mold, people will be like, mold, what? Why is that important?
right.
But people forget that mold behaves differently indoors than it does outdoors. So so how long have you been coaching clients on sleep hygiene?
It's been almost 6 years at this point.
And if
Yeah.
someone comes to you and they're going to bed at say 1 a.m. or 1:30 a.m., how do you, obviously you can't just say go to bed at 9 p.m. because
Yeah.
they're just going to check out. Do you have them work backwards slowly?
Yes, exactly. And really use light therapy. So yeah, making sure that you're blocking light at night and then being exposed to natural sunlight or, some kind of happy light
Yeah,
first thing in the morning and make sure, yeah, that they're waking up at the right time and not sleeping in too late. So yeah, but it is a gradual process for sure.
right. And what would you say the most exciting thing you've learned in the past 6 years, excuse me, regarding sleep is?
Hmm. I mean, I think it's just that I had no idea how many different things affect sleep, that every system in the body affects sleep. So
Yeah,
I think it's just learning about all of those things. And, it's really about making your body as healthy as possible. And I see
right,
not being able to sleep normally as a sign that your body isn't totally healthy.
right,
And that's even if you're trying, like I was a nutritionist, I ate well, I exercised, I took supplements, it's like I'm known as the health, the person who cares about their health in my friend circle. And yet I still got insomnia. Like I still had these imbalances that I had no idea were there.
yeah,
So yeah, that's what I'm most passionate of like educating people about. It's like, okay, there's more to it. And, you know, not watching screens before bed or wearing blue light blocking glasses before bed is important, but it's not going to solve chronic sleep issues because there's just
right.
more going on than that.
What, if any, device do you recommend people use to track their sleep?
That's an interesting question because for a lot of my clients, I actually recommend they don't track their sleep because they're already anxious about
Yeah,
it. And so that can just lead to more like, but I thought I slept 7 hours and only slept 6:45. And, it's like, but it definitely depends on the person. There are other people who sometimes I do recommend they track because they're like, I don't know when I woke up. I don't really know how much sleep I'm getting.
right,
And so I've had people also use one and then say, oh, I'm getting more sleep than I thought I was. And of course, none of them are 100% accurate. So
right.
I think it's more important how they feel the next day and all of
Yeah,
that.
because what
So,
if the device says your deep sleep increased by 30%, but you still feel poorly? Then you're going
right.
to feel bad about yourself, and then you're going to perseverate on that. Most people would, I think.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, they're not, I mean, they're accurate to an extent, but, it's not like, 100%. You can't
Yeah.
go by it. What about nocturnal hypoglycemia?
Yes, I see that in a lot of clients. That's one of the first things I start working on is balancing blood sugar. Um, so, looking at diet, and I have a lot of my clients get a continuous glucose monitor so we can see what's going on. But it's crazy. I've seen quite a few clients. They'll be like, I woke up at 2 a.m. and we look at their CGM and their blood sugar just dropped at 2 a.m. and then went back up. And it's like, wow. I mean, it's at
Yeah.
the exact same time that they said that they woke up. So that's definitely a really common cause that's kind of easy to fix and doesn't even necessarily involve testing, but just monitoring your glucose.
Do you have people eat high protein snack with a little bit of carbs before bed, or
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, my goal is to get them to where they don't need that. And it's ideally just 3 meals a day and their blood sugar staying more regular during the day so it doesn't dip so low at night. But
Yeah.
sometimes a snack before bed can definitely help someone sleep through the night in the beginning while we're working on everything.
Yeah. And so what's something that you're working on now that you're excited about?
Oh, I feel like so many things. Uh, I am looking at switching the labs I'm using and using more Vibrant Wellness Labs. So you mentioned the gut zoomer.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, using the hormone zoomer and the total tox
Yep.
and things like that kind of right away to screen for those things. So that's my next thing that I've taken the test myself. I'm experimenting with them and, then going to, yeah, get to that point where I'm changing that over. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I like their test. They stand behind them and they're cheaper than
Yeah.
the Dutch, and it's going to have the endocrine or 13 endocrine disrupting chemicals on there as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So even if they couldn't afford to do the total tox test, you could at least say, okay, you have these that are interfering with your hormones, so there's likely other toxicants in there as well.
Yeah, exactly.
What's something that you know today that you wish you would have known? I was going to say 10 years ago, but 6 or 6.5 years ago.
Yeah. I think, I mean, another thing I've learned over the past couple years is how much stress plays a role and how much the nervous system plays a role too. And so that's also something that I incorporate into my programs of like really helping people calm the nervous system and get out of fight or flight and that cell danger response. And I think, you probably know too, like so many people dealing with mold and chronic illness, it's become a nervous system issue, whether it
Yeah.
started that way or not. And
Yep.
so, yeah, so people also need that kind of support most of the
Yeah,
time.
the limbic loops that form.
Mhm.
Because I mean, I know how they form because I had them. I probably still have some that I need to work on, but you have to be hyper vigilant about your environment because
Mhm.
you were poisoned by your environment. So of course you're going to be hyper vigilant about it. But your immune system does a great job at learning, a terrible job at unlearning. And so once you can tell it to calm down, I like for vagus nerve stimulation the Hulis device.
Mm.
Um, have you used that before?
I haven't.
So yeah, I don't have it up here. It's just about that big, and you apply it right here. Um, it works on the vagus nerve. It also has a setting for the median nerve. It's the most effective one I've tried of
Okay,
all of them,
awesome.
and they offer, I think, 60-day money back guarantee. So there's really no risk except for the shipping costs.
Right. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks so much for the work that you're doing. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule to come on to the show and let us know if you have some updates in the future. We'd love to have you back.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Dr. Tim, for having me
Yeah,
on. And yes, fun to talk to someone else who's doing very similar things and has a very similar approach. So I appreciate it.
absolutely. Yeah, and we'll put all your links, social media, website, bio, etc., on the podcast page and the website.
Awesome. All right. Thank
All
you.
right. Have a blessed day.
You too.